Martha was rinsing dishes one evening when she saw what she believed to be a small snake slithering around her kitchen sink. Panicked, she trapped it under a glass and called the local wildlife rescue. The vet arrived expecting a routine snake retrieval. However, upon closer inspection, his face blanched. He stared at Martha, his voice trembling. "That's not a snake, it's far worse." Martha looked at veterinarian George, whose face looked pale. "What do you mean it's not a snake?" she asked, her voice filled with fear. Her hand trembled as she pressed the glass down, feeling the snake moving around inside it. George searched for the right words, not wanting to scare Martha even more. Suddenly, he grabbed his phone and began to walk away. "Keep your hand on the glass. I have to call someone." He walked out of the front door, leaving Martha alone, struggling against the snake's strength. It really wanted to get out from under the glass, and Martha had to do her very best not to let that happen. With the size of this thing, she was sure one bite would be enough to kill her. Her heart raced as she waited, and waited, and waited. Just as her hand began to cramp, George returned. "What took you so long?" she blurted out. Her arm was losing strength rapidly, and she needed George to switch places with her. "Here, you hold it down now," she ordered, but George hesitated. But what animal was actually in Martha's drain? Why was Vet George acting so strange? And why didn't he want to help her? In the days before Martha discovered the animal in her drain, she had noticed strange sounds echoing through her house at night. At first, she had just assumed it was her house settling or something like that, but each night, it was somewhere else inside her house, and after a week, she began to hear those sounds during the day as well. She thought she was going mad. She even called a ghost whisperer who came to her house and told her various ghost stories. Luckily, her sister gave her a big reality check when she came to visit. "It's probably just termites, you weirdo," she said boldly. But it did make Martha rethink everything. She wasn't scared anymore. Instead, she was a bit disgusted. She called an exterminator the same day, but when they came by, they told her she didn't have a single termite in her walls or ceilings. She was back to square one, but she was exhausted and annoyed at this point. While washing her dishes, she got lost in thought, thinking about moving away, when she suddenly felt something move past her hand. Martha drained the sink immediately. When it was almost empty, she saw the end of what she thought to be a snake's tail disappear into her drain. Martha screamed and dropped her plate, which shattered on the ground as she jumped backward. Chills ran over her body as she realized a snake had slithered past her hand. Then, it suddenly reappeared. Without thinking, Martha grabbed a glass and placed it over her drain, not wanting the snake to slither into her house. With her other hand, she reached for her phone and called animal control. Her heart raced as she realized she was stuck in her kitchen until someone arrived to catch the slithery animal. She felt it move inside the glass, but was way too scared to look. After what felt like ages, someone rang her doorbell. "Come in through the back door," she yelled as loud as she could, hoping the person at the door would hear her. She didn't want to leave her spot as she didn't want to risk the glass falling over. She heard the person at the door move around her house, and finally, a man stepped into her kitchen. The man introduced himself as George, a vet. Martha explained what she had seen and told George the animal was still underneath the glass. Intrigued, George stepped closer, and Martha lifted the glass slightly. After peeking underneath the glass, he shot upright and gasped. "That's not a snake!" George yelled, his eyes wide in shock. Martha couldn't believe what she was hearing. "What do you mean it's not a snake?" Martha's frustration grew as George hesitated, unsure if he should intervene. "Why are you just standing there?" she snapped. George bit his lip, eyes darting between Martha and the glass. I don't know if it's safe," he stammered. Martha's grip on the glass tightened. "I can't hold it forever," she shouted. George took a small step forward, but then froze again. Martha felt a surge of anger and desperation. "Do something, George," she demanded, her voice shaking. The creature pushed harder against the glass, making Martha's hand tremble. She could feel its strength increasing as if it sensed her weakening grip. "It's getting stronger," she hissed through gritted teeth. George watched in horror as the glass started to tilt. "Hold on, Martha," he exclaimed, finally stepping closer. The pressure beneath the glass intensified, causing Martha to sweat. "I can't hold it much longer," she cried out, her knuckles white with effort. Martha's voice cracked with fear, demanding George help her immediately. "George, please, I can't do this alone," she begged, tears welling up in her eyes. George's face was a mask of indecision. He reached out, but then pulled back, his hand trembling. "I need to know what it is first," he muttered. Martha's heart pounded in her chest. "We don't have time for that," she shouted, desperation clear in her voice. "Just help me!" George, sweating profusely, insisted it wasn't safe to interfere. "Martha, I don't think it's safe to touch it," he said, wiping his forehead. Martha's eyes widened with frustration. "Then what do we do? Let it escape," she retorted. George shook his head. "We need professional help," he explained, glancing nervously at the glass. Martha's patience was wearing thin. "You're the vet here, George," she yelled, her voice echoing in the kitchen. "Act like one." Martha's anxiety spiked as George refused to assist her directly. "You can't leave me like this," she cried, her voice trembling with panic. George backed away, his face pale. "I'm sorry, Martha, but this is beyond my expertise," he said, his voice shaky. Martha's mind raced. The creature's movements became more aggressive, shaking the glass. She looked at George with pleading eyes. "Please, don't leave me alone with this thing," she whispered, feeling utterly abandoned. George stepped back and quickly dialed a number, speaking urgently. "Hello? Yes, this is Dr. George Carson. I need immediate assistance at 345 Maple Street," he said, his voice rising with each word. Martha's heart pounded as she tried to keep the creature contained. George continued, "It's not a snake. It's something else. Please hurry." He hung up and glanced at Martha. "Help is on the way," he assured, but his eyes betrayed his fear. Martha's hand ached, feeling isolated and desperate for help. Her grip on the glass was slipping, and the creature's relentless pushing made it harder to hold on. "George, I can't keep this up much longer," she called out, her voice strained. George hovered nearby, looking helpless. "Just a few more minutes, Martha," he said, trying to sound calm. She gritted her teeth, her mind racing. "I need real help now, not in a few minutes." George's hushed conversation heightened Martha's sense of urgency. She could hear him muttering into his phone. "Yes, it's serious. No, I don't know what it is." His words blurred into a background buzz as she focused on keeping the glass steady. The creature was relentless, and Martha's strength was fading. "George!" she shouted, snapping him back to the present. He glanced at her, eyes wide with worry. "They're on their way," he reassured, but it felt like forever. Martha pleaded softly, her voice barely above a whisper, for George to hurry. "Please, George, I can't do this alone." Her hand was cramping, the pain shooting up her arm. George moved closer, his face etched with concern. "Hang in there, Martha," he said, trying to sound confident. She could see the sweat on his brow. "I don't know how much longer I can hold on," she confessed, tears streaming down her face. "Please, hurry." The tension in the room grew as Martha struggled to hold on. The creature was becoming more frantic, and the glass began to vibrate with its movements. "George, do something!" she cried out, her voice breaking. George looked around, desperate for a solution. He grabbed a towel and pressed it down on the glass, adding his weight to hers. "Just a bit longer," he whispered. Martha nodded, but inside she was screaming, every second feeling like an eternity. 2 more people arrived, equipped with heavy-duty gloves and tools. They moved quickly but carefully, their eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "We're here to help," one of them said, nodding at George. Martha's grip on the glass wavered as relief and fear mingled within her. "Thank goodness," she murmured. George stepped back, giving the newcomers space. "This is Martha," he introduced. "We need to contain this thing right away." They cautiously approached Martha, concern evident in their eyes. "Hi, Martha," the taller one said softly. "We're going to take it from here, okay?" Martha nodded, her eyes fixed on the glass. The other team member adjusted their gloves, ready to assist. "Just hold on a bit longer," they reassured. George stood by, his expression serious. The team exchanged a look, understanding the gravity of the situation. They moved closer, prepared to take over. George took charge, instructing the team to contain the creature immediately. "All right, here's the plan," he said, his voice firm. "We need to get it into the containment box without letting it escape." Martha watched as George pointed to the tools they had brought. "You, grab the box. You, be ready to secure the glass," he directed. The team members nodded, following his instructions without hesitation. Martha felt a flicker of hope amid her fear. Martha's fear escalated as the team moved closer to the glass. The creature underneath seemed to sense the activity, its movements becoming more frantic. "It's getting agitated," she warned, her voice trembling. George glanced at her, nodding. "We're ready," he said. The team positioned themselves, tools in hand. "On my count," George instructed. Martha's heart raced as they prepared to lift the glass. "1, 2, 3, George called out, and the team sprang into action. The team prepared their tools, ready to secure the mysterious creature. They moved with precision, each person knowing their role. "Hold it steady," George instructed, his eyes focused. Martha held her breath, watching their every move. One team member carefully slid a tool under the glass while the other readied the containment box. "We're almost there," George muttered. Martha's grip tightened, her mind racing with worry. The moment of truth was at hand. The team set up a containment box around the glass carefully. George directed them, ensuring every movement was precise. "Easy now, we don't want to startle it," he warned. The box had a sliding lid that the team positioned right next to the glass. Martha watched with bated breath, her eyes darting between the team and the creature. "Is it going to work?" she whispered. George nodded slightly, his focus unwavering. "It has to," he replied. Martha's heart pounded, her fear reaching new heights. She could feel her pulse in her throat as the team made final adjustments to the box. "Almost ready," George said, his voice a low murmur. Martha's grip on the glass tightened, her hand trembling. The creature beneath the glass seemed to sense the tension, its movements growing more erratic. "What if it escapes?" she thought, her mind racing. "We can't let that happen," she resolved silently. She asked George about the creature, her voice trembling. "George, what is it? Why is it so dangerous?" George glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Martha, I wish I could tell you," he said, his voice steady but serious. "Right now, our priority is to contain it safely." Martha swallowed hard, nodding. "Okay, but please, once it's secure, you have to explain," she insisted. George gave a tight nod, his focus already shifting back to the task. George remained silent, focusing entirely on the task at hand. He motioned for the team to proceed, his eyes never leaving the glass. Martha felt a surge of anxiety as she watched them work. The room was filled with the sound of careful movements and the occasional hushed instruction. George's concentration was intense, every action deliberate. Martha's heart raced, her fear mingling with a flicker of hope. "Almost there," George muttered under his breath. The team readied themselves for a coordinated capture of the creature. George counted down, his voice calm and authoritative. "On 3, lift the glass and slide the box over it," he instructed. The team nodded, their muscles tensed in anticipation. 1, 2, 3, George called out. In a swift, practiced motion, the glass was lifted and the box slid into place. Martha held her breath, watching the creature's every move. The moment of truth had arrived. The team swiftly lifted the glass, securing the creature in the containment box. In one coordinated move, they trapped it without giving it a chance to escape. Martha watched, her breath caught in her throat. The box clicked shut, and George immediately locked it. "It's done," he said, exhaling a sigh of relief. Martha finally let go of the glass, her fingers numb from gripping it so tightly. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice shaky. Martha collapsed into a chair, her legs weak with relief. She felt the adrenaline drain from her body, leaving her exhausted and shaky. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes closed as she tried to steady her breathing. George knelt beside her, his face still pale but composed. "You did great, Martha," he said softly. She nodded, barely hearing him over the pounding in her ears. The reality of the situation was just starting to sink in. George assured Martha that it was over, though his tone was far from comforting. "We've got it contained," he said, but his eyes darted nervously to the box. "It's safe now." Martha looked at him, searching for reassurance. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. George nodded, but the doubt in his eyes was unmistakable. "We'll keep it secure," he promised. Martha tried to take solace in his words, but her anxiety lingered. The team locked the containment box, ensuring the creature couldn't escape. They double-checked the locks and seals, working with practiced efficiency. George supervised, his expression tense. "Make sure every latch is secure," he instructed. Martha watched from her chair, her heart still racing. "Is it really safe?" she wondered aloud. One of the team members glanced at her and nodded. "We've got it under control," they said, but Martha could see the uncertainty in their eyes. Martha watched, still shaken, as the team finalized the containment process. They moved the box to a secure location in the kitchen, setting up additional precautions. "We need to monitor it," George said, directing the team. Martha's eyes never left the box. She felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. George sighed, looking at her with a mixture of empathy and concern. "Now we figure out what this is." Martha's initial relief faded, replaced by curiosity and frustration. She watched the team work, feeling a growing need for answers. What was that thing, she wondered. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. The room buzzed with activity, but Martha felt alone with her thoughts. She stood up slowly, determination setting in. She couldn't just sit there anymore. She needed to know what had invaded her home. She demanded answers, her eyes locked onto George's. "What is it, George? I need to know," she said, her voice firm. George hesitated, glancing at his colleagues. "Martha, it's complicated," he began. But Martha wasn't having it. "No more excuses. Tell me what's going on," she insisted, stepping closer. The room fell silent, all eyes on George. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, Martha," he said reluctantly. "You deserve the truth." George exchanged a glance with his colleagues, hesitant to speak. They seemed to be silently communicating, weighing the situation. Martha watched, her impatience growing. "What's the big secret?" she demanded. One of the team members nodded to George as if giving him permission. George took a deep breath, turning back to Martha. "It's not something we see every day," he admitted. Martha's frustration bubbled over. "Just show me already," she snapped. "I need to see it." Finally, George sighed and told Martha she needed to see something. "All right, come with me," he said, leading her toward the containment box. Martha followed, her heart pounding. The rest of the team gathered around, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. "What am I about to see?" she asked, her voice wavering. George paused, looking her in the eye. "Just keep an open mind," he said softly. Martha nodded, bracing herself for whatever was coming. The team gathered around as George prepared to reveal the truth. He carefully unlatched the containment box, his movements slow and deliberate. Martha craned her neck, trying to see inside. "Stay back for now," George instructed. Martha bit her lip, her anxiety mounting. The box lid lifted slightly, just enough for Martha to get a peek. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. George took a deep breath. "Take a look," he said, opening it further. George carefully opened the containment box, allowing Martha to peek inside. "Be ready," he warned, his hand steady but his voice tense. Martha took a deep breath and leaned closer, her eyes widening with curiosity and fear. "What is it?" she asked softly. George lifted the lid just enough for her to see. "Look for yourself," he said. Martha peered inside, her heart pounding as she prepared for the unexpected sight. Martha gasped, recoiling at the sight of a large pink tail. It was unlike anything she had ever seen before. "What is that?" she exclaimed, stumbling back. The tail twitched slightly, sending shivers down her spine. George quickly closed the lid, sealing the box once more. "It's not a snake," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. Martha's mind raced, struggling to process what she had just seen. "I don't understand," she whispered. She whispered in disbelief, realizing it wasn't a snake. "It can't be," she murmured, her eyes wide with shock. George nodded solemnly. "It's not," he confirmed. Martha took a step closer, her fear mingling with curiosity. "Then what is it?" she asked, her voice shaking. George glanced at the team before speaking. "It's something much rarer," he said. Martha felt a chill run down her spine. "Tell me," she insisted. "I need to know." Martha's mind raced with confusion at the strange creature. She tried to piece together everything she had seen and heard. How did it get here? She wondered aloud. The strange sounds in her house, the mysterious movements, everything seemed connected. George and his team watched her, understanding her bewilderment. "It's a lot to take in," George said gently. Martha nodded, still trying to comprehend the reality of the situation. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice small. The team observed Martha's reaction, understanding her shock. They exchanged glances, each one showing empathy and concern. George stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're here to help," he said softly. Martha looked at him, her eyes filled with questions. "But what is it?" she asked again. George took a deep breath, ready to explain. "It's a creature we've rarely encountered," he began, his tone serious. The team nodded, preparing for the conversation ahead. Martha's thoughts spun as she recalled the strange sounds in her house. The scratching in the walls, the rustling in the attic. It all made sense now. She shuddered, realizing how close she had been to the creature all along. Was it living here this whole time? She wondered. George watched her intently, noticing the shift in her expression. "It's connected, isn't it?" she asked, her mind racing with memories of sleepless nights and eerie noises. She questioned George, her voice filled with fear and curiosity. "What exactly is it? How did it end up here?" Her words tumbled out, a mix of confusion and desperation. George hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Martha, this creature is unlike anything we've seen around here," he began. Martha's eyes widened. "You have to tell me more," she insisted. George sighed, looking at his colleagues before continuing. "All right, but you need to be prepared." George hesitated before revealing the creature's true nature. He glanced at his colleagues, who nodded in silent agreement. "This isn't easy to explain," he said, taking a deep breath. Martha leaned in, her curiosity outweighing her fear. "Just tell me," she urged. George finally met her gaze. "It's more common than you think," he said slowly. Martha's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. George continued. "It's something we've dealt with before." He explained it was more common, but equally alarming. "We've encountered similar cases," George said, trying to remain calm. "But they're rare around here." Martha's mind raced, trying to piece together his words. "Are you saying this happens often?" she asked, incredulous. George nodded. "In certain areas, yes. It's a species that's hard to track and even harder to contain, he said. Martha felt a shiver run down her spine. But why my house? She wondered aloud. Martha's confusion deepened as George hinted at a larger issue. There's more to this than just one creature, he said, his tone serious. Martha's eyes narrowed. What aren't you telling me, George? She demanded. He sighed, rubbing his temples. It's not just your house, Martha. There have been other incidents nearby, he admitted. Her heart sank. So, there's a bigger problem? She asked, fear creeping back in. George nodded grimly. We need to address it quickly, he replied. The team explained similar cases of mistaken identities in the area. We've had reports before, one member said. People think they're dealing with snakes or other pests, but it turns out to be something else entirely. Martha listened intently, her mind racing. So, this isn't the first time? She asked. George shook his head. No, and it's becoming more frequent, he admitted. Martha felt a chill, realizing her home wasn't as safe as she had thought. George revealed the creature was actually a large, aggressive rat. It's a species known for its size and aggression, he explained. Martha's eyes widened in disbelief. A rat? That big? She exclaimed. George nodded. Yes, and it's more dangerous than a typical rat, he said. Martha felt a wave of relief mixed with alarm. At least it's not something worse, she thought, but the idea of such a rat in her home was still terrifying. Martha felt a mix of relief and alarm at the revelation. So, it's not some exotic creature, but it's still scary, she said. George nodded, his expression serious. We need to be cautious. These rats can cause significant damage and spread disease, he warned. Martha took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. What do we do now? She asked, looking at George and the team for answers. We handle it carefully, George replied. The team detailed their encounters with such elusive rodents. They're smart and hard to catch, one team member said. We've seen them hide in the smallest spaces. Martha shivered at the thought. How do we get rid of them? She asked. George explained their plan. We'll set traps and use specialized equipment to ensure they're gone, he said. Martha nodded, feeling a bit more reassured. Thank you, she said, grateful for their expertise. Martha understood the creature's danger and their concern. I had no idea rats could be this aggressive, she admitted. George nodded. It's not common, but it happens, he said. The team began preparing their equipment, ready to tackle the problem. Martha watched them, feeling a mix of gratitude and lingering fear. I'll help however I can, she offered. George smiled reassuringly. Just stay safe, Martha, he said. We've got this under control. Martha decided to check her entire drainage system for more rats. The idea of missing any of those creatures made her skin crawl. She grabbed a flashlight and carefully inspected every corner. I need to be sure, she muttered to herself, feeling a mix of determination and dread. Each clank of the flashlight against the pipes echoed loudly, her anxiety growing with each step. She knew she couldn't rest until she was certain there were no more surprises. She called pest control to thoroughly inspect her house. I need a full sweep, she explained to the operator, top to bottom. They assured her a team would arrive shortly. When the pest control team showed up, Martha felt a small sense of relief. Thank you for coming so quickly, she said, leading them inside. They nodded and got to work, checking every nook and cranny. Martha watched anxiously, hoping they wouldn't find anything too alarming. The pest control team found a whole rat colony underneath her house. We've got a big problem here, the lead technician said, shaking his head. Martha's stomach dropped. How many? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Too many, he replied. But don't worry, we'll handle it. They set traps and used specialized equipment to clear the infestation. Martha could hardly believe it. Her home had been a haven for these creatures, and she hadn't known. They cleared the rats, allowing Martha to return home safely. We've got them all, the technician assured her. Martha breathed a sigh of relief, though the thought of what had been under her house still made her uneasy. "Thank you so much," she said, grateful for their hard work. They packed up their gear, leaving her with a sense of closure. But as she looked around her home, Martha couldn't shake the lingering feeling of discomfort. Despite the removal, Martha no longer felt at ease in her home. Every creak and rustle set her on edge. She found herself checking and rechecking the places where the rats had been. "I can't live like this," she thought, frustration mounting. Even though the house was safe now, the peace she once felt was gone. She knew something had to change. "I need to move on," Martha realized, starting to plan her next steps. Martha put her house up for sale, unwilling to stay any longer. The decision wasn't easy, but she knew it was the right one. "I can't live with the memories of those rats," she thought. She contacted a realtor and started the process. "I hope someone else can find happiness here," she said, looking around one last time. The sign went up, and Martha felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. She moved to a different part of town, seeking peace. The new neighborhood was quieter, with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. "This is exactly what I need," she thought, unpacking her boxes. The change of scenery felt refreshing. As she settled into her new home, Martha felt the tension slowly leave her body. "I can finally breathe again," she sighed, smiling as she explored her new surroundings. The fresh start was just what she needed. Martha found happiness living closer to a park she loved. Every morning, she took walks through the park, enjoying the serene environment. "This place is perfect," she thought, watching the ducks swim in the pond. The lush greenery and open spaces brought her a sense of calm. She made new friends, joined community activities, and felt more connected than ever. "I should have done this sooner," she realized, grateful for her new life. To prevent future incidents, she adopted 2 cats. "Meet Whiskers and Shadow," she introduced them to her friends. The cats quickly made themselves at home, exploring every nook and cranny. "You two are my little guardians," Martha joked, watching them chase each other. The presence of her new pets gave her comfort. "No more rats with you around," she thought, feeling more at ease. The cats brought joy and a sense of security to her home. Martha felt more secure, knowing her cats would deter any returning rats. Whiskers and Shadow were always on patrol, their playful antics a constant source of amusement. "You two are the best decision I ever made," she said, petting them fondly. With each passing day, the memories of the old house faded. Martha felt truly at peace in her new home. She smiled, watching her cats play in the sun, knowing she had found happiness again.